Hi, my name is Jay Martin. I wanted to take a moment to do another case study video for you. So again, this will just be a small snippet of game while I talk about one concept, hopefully a little more in detail than you normally get to in a full game. The concept I want to talk about today is the importance of staying in communication with your partners. Obviously, assumes you're playing a team game with two or more people. And ways that you can exploit people who fail to do that, and ways that you can try to recover when you fail to do that. What you're watching now, this is a 3 versus 4 game. My team is the blue dots, the enemy team is the red dots. And what you got right here, I'm the Portuguese player in the center right there. On my left is SK Marsh, on my right is Trip Hammer. We're playing against some guys that seem pretty decent at the game. Right here, and I'm going to try to get you oriented because obviously you're just jumping in this game right now. Right here, excuse me, is the line that kind of divides where Marsh as GB has his army deployed and where I as Portugal have my army deployed. The really interesting terrain feature to point out on this map, and I think my graphics are a little buggy right now because the water is brown, but the interesting terrain feature are these 3 ponds. This right here is the ridge in the center of the map, so the center of the map is kind of right there. And then there's this interesting bottleneck. Actually, there's actually 2 of them, but the one on our side is going to be the important one. There's an interesting bottleneck here. So any army that wants to attack through here, if they can control this little triangle of real estate, if the enemy can control that triangle of real estate on you, you have a real problem, because that means they could turn left and get on the flank of our left player, or they could turn right and get on the flank of me. And there's really no recovering from that short from retreating to the far end of the map right here. So this little polygon of real estate is a really interesting spot on the map, especially on this map. I've played a couple games now where this piece of real estate is really, really important. So that's what I'm interested in, is this little piece of real estate here and how you manage that. Similar to the triangle in Arklay, I think it's a really little interesting piece of ground on one of the maps. The scenario you have right here is Marsh had 4 line units, and these guys have really taken a beating. He's currently getting charged by a couple Dragoons and Dragoon Guards on the right there, and his guys have just had enough. He's been fighting off the GB player for a long time. I think these represent the 4th and 5th Cav units that have come down this angle, and the French player is starting to move his army this direction. On the left end of his line, Marsh is holding off the rest of the French player, and in the center, I'm holding off this GB player here. I'm going to get the Trip Hammer side of the game in a little bit. Something interesting happens there. So we had a situation where Marsh couldn't stand and fight anymore. If he stood there and fought, he was going to get fucked up. So the idea we had was that what if Marsh runs back and retreats through this bottleneck here and occupies a position, say, here. The thought of what maybe could happen is that the French player would follow him, and right about the time the French player gets here, then I could jump on that French player's rear. The reason is that that would have vacated this area here. The GB player would not be able to counterattack onto my flank as long as I had a line unit here protecting the entrance. Does that make sense? So if Marsh retreats these GB line this direction, encourages the French to follow him here, and if I can hold here and form a new line there, then I'll be on the flank of these 4 French units. That was our idea in the game. This is always kind of a gambit. So we were purposely going to break communication between Marsh's army and I. Marsh's army and I were going to, and Marsh is making his move right now. And if I hold down the blue dots, you can see me moving the infantry over to take advantage of this. So the idea was that we were going to break communication with our army, but encourage our enemy to over-pursue. And if our enemy over-pursued more than we did, then that would give us the opportunity to get on his flank. Trip Hammer had, when we were talking about it, had some, like, interesting military history, Battle of Cannae or something like that to draw an analogy to, but I'm sure this has been done before in real life. But that was our idea, to pull Marsh's army back now, which is coming, And what really worked out for us well is that all of the GB units there are really low. They're really depleted. So the GB right flank that's there is really low depleted, and we launch a counterattack here just to like keep the GB player busy, because the worst thing that would happen is if GB and France both advance their their line together. Now you can see it's working because France is following. And Marsh has retreated back to past the bottleneck. And then what we're going to try to do is get this French player to over-pursue. And my units are here, about to show up on his flank. Now, I think this French player was playing well. He had recognized all of my infantry coming here. So I might have hid this a little better, moved a little bit slower. But that's what we wound up doing. So, yeah, so let's let this go for another second or so. Here you go. Pause. Right about now, the French player has over-pursued. He's created a weird salient with his partner here. And honestly, the only thing preventing the GB player from rushing forward to exploit that salient is my one line unit here. But my one line unit is really healthy, and I'm facing a rifle with about half strength and a line unit with half strength. So I'm pretty confident that between my holding line there and my 3 assaulters here, we can make that happen. Okay, so let's watch what happens to the French guy. I should maybe be in super fast forward. What's really nice is the terrain feature. I don't know if you notice this here, but this rock is preventing my line unit there from taking fire from this direction. So I'm pretty confident that this line unit can hold out against whatever he wants to push this direction. Okay, now the French player doesn't sense the danger and keeps moving his Polish further and further up. Now this is, in a vacuum, a brilliant position for the Polish unit to be. He's going to be on Marsh's flank. But the downside is that my guys are moving into their position to get in this guy's rear. And not only that, there's a bigger opportunity here because these players have overexploited their flank. We're going to say we can get these 3 units out of the way. Once we route their 3 units, we create the opposite problem to them, and we'll be able to control their triangle. And I'll be able to move line up here, start rushing on the GB left, which is weak already, and also create a flanking position here, which would obviously threaten the main body of the French army. So it's a really interesting give and take. It's like you want to let, at some points, you want to break communication with your partner to gain advantage, you know, but you got to be really careful how you do it. The most simple way to do it is to constantly maintain communication with your partner. The reason for that is that if you get flanked on the left or the right, well, that's easy. All you have to do is, you know, withdraw and pull back into kind of the horseshoe shape. But if you get flanked in the center, like we might flank these 2 players here, then we could turn in either direction, which gives you much greater options. Right? It's a much more devastating tactical blow than just, you know, creeping around someone's right, you know, and forcing them back. And here the game is up because he has to go into melee to try to break out of the salient that he's caused. But that's not an answer because I have a line unit and Marsh has a line unit all shooting on that Polish, so they're going to die pretty quick. And then all that's left then, this Chasseur is going to route fairly quickly. So there you go, and that is the breaking of the flank. I thought the real telling move there, that was a good cav charge from that guy, by the way. It caught me totally off guard. But the telling move was Marsh's withdraw back through the bottleneck, encouraged the French player to follow him. As the French player followed him, we were able to destroy those units in place, and then this obviously opens an incredibly wide area. You notice I've already moved my second line unit in to kind of create a new line here. Once I can crush these units, then we'll have the game, at least have the game on that flank. So I thought this was a really interesting example of that kind of play. And the trick here was the feint back, encouraged the over pursuit, created a salient in their line. So when you're playing, you don't want to make the same mistake that the French player did, but if you are playing, you want to kind of smell those opportunities. I thought it was really interesting. Over on Trip Hammer's flank, another issue is developing. And if you've never tried to play a 3 versus 4 game before, I really encourage you to try it because it forces you to do some really interesting maneuver. You don't do really interesting maneuver in a 4v4 or a 3v3 like you do in a 3v4. Trip Hammer's side tells kind of a similar story. Let me walk you through this. We had kind of caught a detachment. Again, we'd broken a salient through our opponent's line. This is what I'm talking about when you break through their center. And you see my blue dots. I'm able to turn, and we're going to catch these Prussian forces here. There is another combined group from the opponent rushing this direction. And then Trip Hammer has kind of broken my own rule, and he's sort of separated his army. Two interesting things are going to happen in this part of the battle. You notice as this group of units rushes forward, Trip and I are going to have to reform a line. But the important part here is that we reform a straight line. We reform a line with communication, right? It's not just a bunch of units willy-nilly. When all these units show up, we have to reform into a straight line. Trip Hammer takes the opportunity to come up and put more firepower on these foot guards that I caught in melee, and then we were just trying to surround them with firepower. But when the Portuguese infantry shows up, you'll notice that Trip Hammer reforms the line. So we were temporarily taking advantage of position, but when a threat came back, we reformed into a solid line of communication, which is the exact thing that they didn't do over there. And you can watch, this is Trip Hammer making that movement now. See, he's pulling back to form a solid line of communication. And then that'll buy us time while I continue to route the foot guards there. Eventually, I'll get a turn on the flank of these units. The reason this all works, the reason you're able to play a 3 versus 4 game successfully is coordination, right? And not necessarily coordination. I might be speaking out of turn there, but just solid tactics from all the players involved. You don't even really have to communicate, but the right tactical move from Trip there was to reform into a solid line, right, to engage this group of units. And as he did that, that allowed me to move down, which I'm doing here, to get on their flank, right? That's just solid tactical play. And the reason the opponent team over there got into trouble is they over-pursued, and in a way we encouraged them to over-pursue here. And what we did in this game that I thought, I was honestly really pleased with how he played in this game. You lose a lot of 3v4s. You don't win too many of them. So when you do win one of them, you kind of want to review it and see what do we do well. And I thought what our team did really well in this game is we had just good solid tactical play from everybody. The other thing I want to mention is that Trip, who had split into detachments, he has a detachment here, breaking the rule of losing communication with his main army. But if you're going to break that rule, the asterisk there, the exception there is, make sure you do it in strength, or make sure you can win. So if you want to break a detachment, make sure you can win. Trip broke into detachment here, but he was sure he can win. He outnumbers that guy to 2-1 with his detachment, so he was able to put a good result there. And this here is the final reduction of that initial group of forces, the initial Prussian foot guards, and then the reinforcing force that came down. And just with some simple, solid tactical movement, I felt that we were able to win this little engagement here. But again, you might say it occurred because we broke through the center of their line, which allowed us to turn right onto their rear, and they wound up in a tricky salient area again. Don't do that. The team that maintains better communication with their partners, that is better playing with their partners, that doesn't stick their neck out, that's the team that's probably going to win. Right, that's probably the team that's going to win, and I thought this was a really interesting game because it really showcased that. And this is the end, obviously, just the remaining GB forces there. So maybe I showed you more of this game than I intended to initially, but I thought this was a really interesting game that showcased when you're playing these terrain games and you have the opportunity to, stretch your line or disengage from your partners. Just the importance of that general concept of staying in communication with your partners. Don't be too rash. Don't stick your neck out. You want to not necessarily play a conservative game, but you want to play a maintainable game. There's got to be a better term for that, but you want to play a game that, keep your army... I mean, different situations call for different solutions, but as a general rule, you want to stay in communication with your partners. You want to have a solid base for your army, and I think that's a great way to play the game. So, hey, GG to the guys that we played against. They were actually great sports and good players. I think maybe most of them stuck around to the end, even when they were losing. So thanks for doing that, guys, and GG to Trip and Marsh for playing with me. It was a blast. So thanks for watching. My name is Jay Martin, and stay in communication with your partners. Be a good teammate. Bye.